Disney's Snow White, Rachel Zegler, is now feeling the backlash after she let her truth be told, in the process letting more than half of her country know just how little a regard she holds them in for having the audacity to vote for the presidential candidate that didn't benefit her the most. It isn't the first time Zegler has lashed out like this, but it is the first time she has walked it back so explicitly, which suggests she must have gotten the dressing down of a lifetime, not just from Disney, but from A24 as well. You know, the studio behind Y2K, the other movie that she just torpedoed. Let's take a look at the backlash, and her subsequent walking back of her initial lashing out against the majority population. Let's dive in. Deadline Hollywood does a pretty good retelling in their article Snow White star Rachel Zegler and Disney damned by Megyn Kelly and ruthless podcast hosts over Fuck Donald Trump post. Of course, Zegler was raked over the coal across social media and in the vlogosphere. We did a video on it, as did most of our peers in the space, so just among independent creators. Videos staring Zegler a new one had millions of views between them. Maybe in time, Deadline Hollywood will pay more attention to the voices of the people and the movie-going audiences of the world, but for now, Megyn Kelly is on their radar, so let's see what they have to say. Fuck Donald Trump may not be the message the Walt Disney Company wants its Snow White star putting out there right now, but that's what they've got, even as Rachel Zegler tries to walk it back. In now deleted posts on Instagram, Zegler slammed the former and future president for his November 5th election win over Kamala Harris as a deep sickness in this country. The alum of Steven Spielberg's West Side Story, who is currently on Broadway in Romeo and Juliet, went on to lament the sheer amount of people who showed up for this man who threatens our democracy. Deadline Hollywood then proceeded to repeat what she said, so jumping forward a bit, another 4 years of hatred, leaning us towards a world I do not want to live in. Leaning us towards a world that will be hard to raise my daughter in. Now, as I stated in the previous video, I was under the impression that Zegler does not have a daughter, and that like Wanda in WandaVision, she only dreamt one up for the occasion. And indeed, Deadline Hollywood did confirm that this daughter is a figment of her imagination. With Snow White out next spring and Netflix animated flick Spellbound out next week, the 23-year-old Zegler, who doesn't have a daughter, quickly found herself getting some very hard knocks in the social media world for her condemnation of Trump and his MAGA base, which makes up more than half of the population of her country. Let's not forget about that. And before we move on, let's take a moment to reflect on how sick that is. Rachel Zegler pulled out an imaginary daughter just so that she could be butthurt that this imaginary daughter wouldn't be able to have an abortion after allowing a bunch of dudes this imaginary daughter would not want to have kids with to jizz inside of her. And the entire premise of that is bullcrap anyway, because in LA she can still have all the abortions she wants, and even in the reddest of states that can be arranged, you just have to jump through a few more hoops to get there. So she's just employing deception to score a cheap political point here, but it does not reflect well on her. Moving on, as Trump continued naming controversial nominees like ex-representatives Matt Gaetz and Tulsi Gabbard to his 2.0 administration, that blowback was followed by a full-on hurricane Thursday from Megyn Kelly and her pals on the Ruthless podcast. There's something wrong with this person, Kelly bluntly said of Zegler. Hello, Disney, you're gonna have to redo your film again, because this woman is a pig. And you fired Gina Carano for far less than this nonsense. Ex-Fox News anchor Kelly threw down with the Ruthless hosts and her podcast audience over the already controversial live-action forthcoming Snow White. I'm sorry, Disney, she has to go right now. Carano is currently heading towards trial against Disney in September of 2025 in her Elon Musk-backed sex discrimination suit, over being canned in 2021 from The Mandalorian for social media posts of her own. Now working on projects with the hard conservative Daily Wire, the former martial arts fighter denies Disney's assertion that she decided to publicly trivialize the Holocaust by comparing criticism of political conservatives to the annihilation of millions of Jewish people. In fact, Carano says she was targeted for her more contrarian point of view to the usual Hollywood progressiveness, while Star Wars franchise co-stars like Mark Hamill and Pedro Pascal were allowed to blast Trump during his first term all the time with no recrimination. Moving back to Kelly, Deadline Hollywood continued. They're dealing with the controversy with ABC, with one of their biggest stars, Michael Strahan, who refused to put his hand over his heart for the anthem and the blowback just for that. Short-lived NBC host Kelly added with the ruthless co-host Michael Duncan, stating beforehand, "This comes at a time when Disney stocks keeps going down." Deadline Hollywood then added, Disney stock was actually up nearly 10% today after a strong Q4 earnings report. But this is misleading. Yes, stock was up that much, but for two reasons. First, the markets worldwide are beyond excited about what Trump will do for the worldwide economy, now when the self-proclaimed adults in the room are on their way out of office. And I assure you, no one outside of them, or that stood to benefit from them, see them as the adults in the room any longer. And secondly, Disney's good results are for the most part down to the success of Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine. Two movies that went against everything Iger has been pushing. And even so, they still haven't learned anything, because if they had, Kevin Feige would have been adamant to get Deadpool and Wolverine back into the fray as fast and as often as possible. Instead, he still seems more committed to get Blade made, just not with Wesley Snipes, the only Blade in the eyes of the fans. That was a sidetrack though, back to the main story. You're going to put out a Disney film with Snow White, a beloved American character. And as a European, yes, I will grant that that particular iteration of the character is American. So let's move on. With a woman who hates more than half the country, the half that just elected Donald Trump, Kelly said to her Sirius XM listeners, "This is an incredible pivot point right now." Indeed, and Disney must be aware of that, because shortly after came Zegler's forced retraction, saying on Instagram, "Hi everyone, I would like to sincerely apologize for the election post I shared on my Instagram last week. I let my emotions get the best of me. Hatred and anger have caused us to move further and further away from peace and understanding, and I am sorry I contributed to the negative discourse. This week has been emotional for so many of us, but I firmly believe that everyone has the right to their opinion, even when it differs from my own. I am committed to contributing positively towards a better tomorrow." Well, if you are, that would be a first, let's put it that way. Disney has yet to comment on the matter. No doubt because they're at a loss of what to do, because culture has moved decidedly against them and everything they've been championing for years now. The Deadline Hollywood piece then concludes. In a town where deep Democratic donors and studio bosses are trying to gauge the cultural temperature right now as Trump's second inauguration nears, what Disney does or doesn't say about Zegler's comments could become the standard out of Hollywood for the next 4 years. It's early days, but hot off that earnings report Thursday, the Bob Iger-run company has no plans to push back the Gal Gadot co-starring and Greta Gerwig co-written Snow White from its March 21st, 2025 premiere, Deadline has learned. So, how do you think releasing the movie in its current form is going to work out for them? Let me know in the comments.